about friendship. Let's do 30 minutes on the topic of friendship. Plan is I'm going to do a little bit of a recap of the benefits of finding friendship at work. And I want to bring to life the friendship scale we talked about on the podcast. We talked about it sort of loosely on the podcast, but I want to bring it to life visually for you. And then I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk about some different ways in terms of finding friendship. And we thought if we can squeeze it in, which is on us to be succinct, that we could do a bit of a Q&A, because obviously, joking aside, Sarah and I are friends and we are very different. And if there's any questions that you have got about how we manage our working friendship, then we are, pretty happy to answer all questions, Sarah. I think no question's a bad question, and we'll be as open as we can. So let me get my screen up, and then we will get started with a quote, actually, everyone. A quote that I really liked from the podcast. I came across the work of Julie Beck, who is a writer for The Atlantic, and she has this series called The Friendship Files, where she sort of interviews people about their friendships. It's quite nice. And there was a quote when I was reading her work, which was this one, and I really liked it. It said, friendship is a relationship with no strings attached except the ones you choose to tie. I mean, family, tied to them for life, unfortunately, like it or not. Friendship, you can choose what you tie to. So I thought it was quite nice that it is a choice. And there was something else we talked about on the podcast as well, about this sort of this sort of tension between dependency and independency, like that actually in a friendship you do need some independence because it's a choice to be a friend, but also part of what makes that friendship stronger is that there is a level of dependence on each other, that you trust that person's going to be there for you when you need them, but that's also a choice for them to do it. I think it's an interesting tension that you have. I guess we're probably quite familiar with the concepts of friendship more broadly, but what we wanted to focus on was the context of friendship in work. And we mentioned, and I know lots of you will be aware of it, but the Gallup study, which says that one of the biggest predictors of happiness at work is whether people have a best friend. And on the podcast, we did talk about this a little bit more. I'm going to dive into it. The pressure of a best friend, BFF forever, is I think for me, I was like, I don't, that puts too much pressure on it for me. But I did identify with feeling happier at work when I've had a friend that I've felt a sense of connection and belonging to, but that I didn't love the word best friend at work. Felt a bit too like primary school. And in terms of why it is a need to have these friendships at work rather than just a nice to have, the first thing was all about actually our work-life balance. Like, it's shown that you kind of have better work-life fit, work-life balance when you have a friend. It brings a bit more perspective. It means that our days don't get dominated by doing. It brings back the human being. And so you can find a bit more work-life fit when you have that. The other thing is about kind of ideas and conversation and connection. People who have friends at work kind of come up with more ideas. They solve problems faster as well. It's one of the big benefits that you get. And the third thing that came up is it actually reduces stress. So much better for stress management, and helps people to make much more positive progress. So these are things that are very important to us: work-life balance, coming up with ideas to solve problems faster, and reducing our levels of stress at work. Mean that friendship, as sort of nice a concept as it might be, is actually something that we all do need to think about a little bit more. And when we're diving into our understanding of what makes better quality friendships, I found the friendship scale quite interesting. In fact, I'm going to talk scale, and I'm going to talk about those two little people waving at each other. So the friendship scale, first of all, there are 5 levels of friendship, I guess is the way we want to think about it. And it'd be interesting after I talk these through to understand a little bit more about where you might have some sort of areas of growth potential today. But let me talk about the scale first of all. So at the bottom of the scale is a stranger, so like entry point into a friendship. And really this is like, I know of you. I've heard about you, good and bad. And then it sort of moves up a little bit, and that stranger could become an acquaintance. And that becomes, I know you now. Like, I know you. I've gone from I know of you to you are now somebody I know. And then that acquaintance can become a casual friend. And what we're getting to here is, I think I like you. I think I like you. I can probably give and take you, but I think I like you. I enjoy spending time with you. And then it gets a bit more committed and it becomes a close friend. And at this stage, it's, I understand you. I understand like your world, like we kind of, maybe we relate to each other because of our experiences at work. And then you get all the way to intimate, which is a funny word, but I find the definition of this quite useful, which is I connect with you. So it's not really, I think, you know, we use intimate often in different contexts, don't we? But in the context of friendship, it's this idea that I connect with you. You and me are kind of in this together, and we are sharing things with each other because we have that sense of connection. And I think it is useful for you to reflect on where your friends might sit today. Sarah and I, maybe we'll just bring this to life a little bit. We had a bit of a chat about this. I think personally for me, when I look at the scale, what it makes me think is I move through this really quickly. I have quite a rapid move through the scale. I meet a lot of people and I decide very quickly whether I connect with them or not. And I don't have very many people here at all. Like I have one or two people. I have a lot of people here. I have quite a lot of casual people. I like you, but I have one or two intimate friends, and I sort of progress the scale quite quickly. But I'd say a lot of the time it sort of stops. It stops here. Sarah, what are your reflections when you look at the friendship scale? Because we had a bit of a chat about this.
So it takes me much longer than it does you to move through that scale. But I think probably the depth of my relationships probably go deeper than yours do, and for longer. So I have got very, very long term, I connect with you friendships, and I sort of stick with those people for a long time. So I don't naturally have a lot of newness in my friendships. I was trying to think the other day, like, when was the last time I made a new friend? And I think, you know, the last couple of years, and people are saying about it in chat, has perhaps made that harder. But I sort of feel like I've got a few friends, but I've known them for a long time and I'm incredibly connected to and know them very, very well. But interestingly, I think all of those people have come from work originally, all of them. So none of them are from things that I do outside of work, other than I do consider my sisters my friends, but they are family. So I think that's slightly different.
So your out of work friends have come from work friends?
Yes. Yeah. Every time.
Well, I think I keep one quite separate, probably a bit more sort of distinct that way, less blurry. Okay, so I think there's no great revelation on the friendship scale, but as you're just thinking about how you find friends, the quality of your friendship, how easy you find it to make friends, I think it can prompt a little bit of reflection. And I also think where you put yourself into situations where you're meeting different people, like I often find here, the more like networks I'm part of, like I'm part of quite a few different groups, this is where I make a lot of those connections, like work communities, work networks, and then I sort of decide from them whether there's someone that might go up the scale. I mean, I never say that to them, like, you've made it past casual, but I think for me, if I didn't spend time in those communities where I'm having those kind of casual connections, almost like more acquaintance-like relationships, I would find it difficult to get to the next ones, particularly because Sarah and I, like, our company's really small. Not everybody, several of who are here, want to be our best friends at work. So we sort of need to find some more people in a wider work context in order to build some of those friendships that we all quite need at work. And then the last thing that I wanted to say before I hand over to Sarah is we had this this word best that I found a bit tricky to kind of reflect on a little bit. Oh, and by the way, sorry, I was a bit grumpy on the podcast for people that actually listened to it. I was definitely having a grumpy moment when we recorded. But this idea of best, I found put quite a lot of pressure on like what a good friendship needs to look like. And Sarah and I had this discussion about the difference between sort of transformational friendships, which are like, I guess what you might think of as best, like your best friends, the transformation. So Sarah, for example, is one of my sort of transformational friendships in my career and my life, like a best friend. But actually, I still think there is a lot of value in transitional friendships, which the research doesn't really support this. So it's a very like Helen view of the world. But when I think about me and my career and the friends that have been most valuable to me, quite a few of them have been there for points of transition in my work and life, like coming back from maternity leave or becoming a manager for the first time or starting in an industry that I knew nothing about. Those people that were there for you at those points in time were amazing friends for me when I most needed them. They were sort of bonds that I chose to tie at that moment, but I'm not necessarily as close with them now, and I don't think any worse of the friendship for that. It was really helpful for me when I needed it. And yeah, so that was my own reflections. Shall I stop sharing, Sarah, so you can take over?
Yeah. And actually just building on that point about the kind of the in the moment and after the moment, I think and I think somebody else is saying this in chat as well, often because of the power dynamics, I think that was a really good point there I think it was Claire who made that point. Sometimes there is only so far I think you can take your friendship because of power dynamics in an organization. And so I've done the opposite to what Helen just described. So Helen sort of talked about, oh, you might have those transitional friendships and they're really useful in that moment. And then those friendships fade, and that's okay too. Whereas I've then had the opposite experience of thinking, well, I'm sort of on a leadership team with a couple of these people, or maybe this person manages me, or maybe me and my friend might end up having to apply for the same job. That all those things have happened to me. And so you have got a good level of connection with those people, but almost once the power dynamics, once you all go off in your different directions, you can sort of let go of those power dynamics. Those friendships for me have got even stronger. And so I think just noticing, like ebb and flow of friendships, I think is okay. And it's sometimes okay to go, well, this feels like right for right now, but that doesn't mean it couldn't look and feel different in the future. So anyway, that has been my experience. I've also got a quote, Helen, but a very different one, which probably, talks a little bit about our friendships. So I was thinking a bit more about friendship, and I always like to have some new news for Pod Plus, just in case people have listened to the podcast already. And Margaret Heffernan, in her book Uncharted, which I talk about quite a lot because it's one of those books that I come back to really frequently. If you've not listened to Margaret on our podcast or watched any of her TED Talks, I'd really recommend it. You don't need to read her books, but her TED Talks like Dare to Disagree and The Human Skills We Need Right Now are both brilliant. And one of the things that she did was a lot of research into high achievers and, as she describes them, important organizations. So big global organizations that were doing really critical work. And one of the things that she found is this: friendships had faded and time to think was rare. And her sort of reflection on that, on sort of observing that the people weren't making time for friendships, was it left me wondering who will give us stamina and solidarity when the storms come. And her research indicates, certainly from a CEO level, that CEOs talk frequently about the importance of friendships to help them in the tough moments. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean being best friends with someone they're necessarily working alongside, but actually really senior people do talk quite frequently about just how important work friendships are for them in terms of having, a sounding board or someone to have a chat to, but probably who's got the empathy to understand their world. And I think you do have a different kind of connection to those people versus someone who maybe is a friend from someone who sort of probably doesn't understand your world, who can be sympathetic, but perhaps they can't be empathetic in quite the same way. And so one of the things that Margaret Heffernan talks about is how we've got to sort of reprioritize this. We've got to emphasize to people that this is important. But because it often doesn't feel in the moment important, it never makes it onto any of our to-do list, does it? Find some friends. We never go bullet point this week, I need to find some friends. So we often then think, well, have I really got time for lunch? And she talked about how when she observed all these high achievers, none of them ever made time to have lunch together, ever, because they'd always just think, I'm going to use that time to make some progress, or I'm just going to basically, this is pre-pandemic, the book was read, I'm just going to do work at my desk because I've got so much to get done. So we understand that sense of conflict between, what you need to get done, productivity, and also what we need emotionally and from a kind of connection perspective. So I found that really interesting. So we talked about these three Ps on the podcast that help friendships. And I have tried to think about, can we make these practical? Because these are sort of principles, and I was sort of interested to think about, can we get close to a so what? So what might we do? Not to force friendships or to fake friendships, because that's not what we want to do. But I think what we can do is put ourselves in positions where we're more likely to form friendships. Those might be more transitional friendships. Who knows where they might go. So the first P was about proximity. And proximity means both sort of emotional proximity as well as physical proximity. And I think this is a particularly interesting one in the context of how we're all working now. So let's assume for some of us we've had a lot less proximity physically over the past couple of years. And some of that will probably continue. Most organisations are going to a hybrid way of working, and most organisations are seeing people coming together as an opportunity for people to collaborate, spend time with each other. I think all smart organisations recognise we don't want people to come to the office to sit on a laptop in front of a screen and not talk to each other. That sort of doesn't feel now like a good use of our time, which is a good thing. Appreciate it's not universal, but in the main, I think that is where people are going. But there are probably some organisations, and ours is one of these, where we're still primarily very remote. You know, we don't spend that much time together. I don't see Helen in person that frequently. I see her on a screen. I hear from her a lot on WhatsApp, but we actually very rarely are in a room together. So how can you still create emotional proximity without maybe having physical proximity? That's my essay question to answer. That's the thing that I think is interesting. And that's where I got to. I wonder if we need to spend more time, and the idea for action here is understanding like who people are, kind of what matters to them, creating the space to do that. So this is called More About Me. This is a 10-minute tool that we have that's free on our website, and we'll put the link in chat to that. And this is just one example of how you might do this. So this is, you'll probably most of you be familiar with Simon Sinek's Let's Start with the Why. I wonder now whether it's even more important that we start with the who. So before we get to like why we're here as a team or as a company, what we need to achieve and how we're going to achieve it, do we need to start from our teams thinking, well, who are we all? What's important to us? What motivates and drives us? And this doesn't need to be super deep and meaningful from sort of day one, but it might just be creating habits and rituals and moments that are designed to help us to learn a bit more about each other, about what's most important to us, about what we enjoy. I often ask a question in our workshop on values, one thing you really enjoy doing outside of work. And even that one question just gives me a tiny window into everybody else's world, all these people I've not met before. And people do some fascinating and really interesting things. All like me, they do some kind of very day-to-day things, like they like going for a walk. I'm like, oh, me too. Or they like reading fiction. But you're just getting that sense of you're connecting based on who someone is, not the job that they do or what we need to achieve together this week. So I think anything that we can do to create these moments to learn more about who we all are. I think we've talked before about Helen in one of her previous organizations. They did a Spotify playlist where everybody chose one music track that was important to them. And they sort of made a team Spotify playlist, and they played bits of it. And then they explained a bit about why they chose that song. Another brilliant way where you would just know a bit more about someone if you do those kinds of things. So maybe this is part of a monthly team meeting. Maybe this is just something you do every 6 weeks. You design a small fun exercise that is very much designed just to get that emotional connection and doesn't rely on physical connection for that to work.
My song, by the way, was A Spoonful of Sugar Makes the Medicine Go Down. like 2 things with a smile was generally the origins of that.
I was going to say, for someone who doesn't eat much sugar, that wouldn't have been the first.
Well, also my old manager Phil used to say I was like Mary Poppins, always pulling another thing out of the bag. So there was like the smile nice. And the other things in the bags.
Mine would be Rhiannon by Fleetwood Mac. Because my parents always said, even though Sarah was one of the most common names in the year that I was born, everybody's called Sarah in the early 80s. They said I was named after a Fleetwood Mac song. And then by complete coincidence, I was having an emergency C-section, having my little boy. And they were like, oh, is a bit of sort of 70s rock okay? I mean, I didn't really want to answer that question at that moment, but the song that played was Rhiannon by Fleetwood Mac. And it's one of the few times that I got slightly emotional at that point and thought, please be okay. And he was absolutely fine. So that would be mine. So next P is prioritizing time together to have fun. And when we say fun, it just means something that we talked about, this idea of deep fun or being quite playful. And I was thinking here, what often works quite well, and we talked about a few examples on the podcast, is can you create an opportunity for people to come together around something that impacts everyone? That's kind of the question to ask. So can you create an opportunity for people to come together around
I think
that
Sarah's
see.
Wi-Fi is just stalled, but it's come back now.
Oh.
Sorry, Sarah. You're good.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So how can we come together around something that impacts everyone? And the example that I think we talked about was, whether it's like office design or what you eat in an office. So I was trying to think about other examples, because that was sort of okay, but I think for lots of us, probably not that realistic. One of the things that I do hear really frequently from people is how technology has sort of taken over some of our lives in terms of the amount of distractions and interruptions we have in a day. And yesterday I asked this question to a group where I said, do you feel in control of some of those distractions? Do you think you could do something differently in terms of those distractions? And even though they've got all these different distractions, they all sort of said yes, but they'd never consciously come together to decide how we're going to use technology to do better work and easier work to make our lives more efficient. And when they really challenged themselves on like, okay, so why do you have notifications on, and why do you work in a certain way? Some of it was definitely to do with like FOMO, like fear of missing out. I've sort of got really used to it. We all like to be needed. And so I was talking to them about, well, what experiments could you come up with together to reduce the amount of distractions in your day, to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the work that you do? That to me felt like a really good thing. That, fun might be a bit of a stretch, but certainly experimenting is quite fun because you've got more space to fail, you can be more playful, and everybody recognizes that sometimes technology hinders us more than helps us. So if we wanted to start with, well, let's use technology really positively, what might that look like? Let's experiment with that. I can imagine teams coming together and kind of having quite a lot of fun with it and being like, oh God, I really miss my notifications. That's exactly what Helen would say. Or I might say, oh, I can't imagine turning my emails off on holiday, but I'm going to give it a try. And I think you could just have some fun with something like that. So there's one idea for you. And then the last one, which I think is probably the hardest, is patience. So this idea that, of course, you can't form a friendship like this. It does take time. So I was thinking, one of the things that you could create is opportunities to learn together that are outside of the day-to-day, because friendships often form when we're not having to go, okay, well, we've got to go through our project Gantt chart right now, or we've got to go through where we are with a status update. And so one of the things that we see some organizations do are things like book clubs, or increasingly actually podcast clubs, where people join the club. Every week you listen to either a different episode of the same podcast or a different podcast. So you just keep rotating podcasts. But the point is you come together to discuss them. So you listen in your own time, in your own way. And then a bit like we're doing now, you come together and you go, oh, that was fascinating. I just didn't really like that format. I found that person a bit annoying. I thought some really good ideas. And essentially you're giving those friendships a chance. You're giving those friendships a chance to form. And maybe they end up being quite transactional. You just sort of get on for that moment in time and that feels really nice. Or maybe over time, some of those friendships do get to deeper connection. But I think creating those moments within our organizations where there's a chance of you're coming back together frequently. I think it's the frequency that's really important. That sort of helps with the chance to form those friendships. And that was everything from me.
Thanks for the ginger hair.
You're welcome. That was my artist's illustration of you and I this morning. I was like, oh, I need a quick slide to do Ask Me Anything. So I will stop sharing because we don't need to see that for too long. But if anyone now has any questions on our friendship, just generally working together with a friend, any challenges we've had as a friend working together, what it's like to do a podcast with a friend. Volunteering, actually, I'm just catching the end of chat. Volunteering is also volunteering through work is how I've also formed some very, very good friends. But any questions anyone's got, let us know now.
Imagine conflict amongst friends at work where you disagree. What do we do when we disagree, Sarah?
We use your mantra that you came up with, and someone said, have you had arguments? Yep, absolutely. So I don't argue because I prefer to bottle things up and not talk about things. It's very much my approach to life. And Helen actually is much better at sort of just she argues and moves on very quickly. Whereas for me, I'm like, that's it, we're over. So we have a very different approach to things going wrong. So Helen's mantra, which has served us very well, particularly over the last 2 years, is fix friction fast. So fix friction fast. And also I just remember that, so that's helpful. So the we get a bit, I think of it as getting a bit antsy. We very rarely get angry at each other, but we get a bit like aggravated is a good description, and a bit sort of frustrated and antsy. We call it very quickly, and we'll just be like, either sometimes it's just like saying sorry. I do think a few times both of us gone, sorry, I was a bit grumpy, or sorry, I'm just a bit stressed. Sometimes that's to do with stuff outside of work as well. You know, like you've been on the phone trying to get through to the doctors for half an hour, and then you have, just like you've not got enough time, and then you get all antsy, and then you don't sort of show up in the way that you'd like to. So sometimes I think it's just about acknowledging that and just saying sorry. And then we have had moments of sort of deeper disagreement, which are maybe less like friction, but where we just have different points of view on something. What I think we have also found, and Helen and I were talking about this only yesterday, yes, there's fixed friction fast on those quick things. Where we have deeper disagreement, we now sort of, in a nice way, enjoy it because we know we get to better outcomes. So even though I don't sort of love it, I hate conflict really, where we deeply disagree, I always think I try to approach it with, that's interesting, and have the confidence of sort of almost embracing the process because you'll get to better work. Now we can do that because we are very good friends. I think that's easier to do, but we have sort of learned that bit by trial and error. So I hope that helps.
I'm reading Sarah's. I struggle to form deep friendships with people at work because I don't want to end up talking about work on my time off. Am I alone with this? That's interesting. I mean, yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I think, do you know what? I don't think I talk about the detail at work. I'm just trying to think about the friendships I've had. I think I've probably more talked about how I feel about work, or how I feel. So, but more feelings, like rather than the facts of work, like have you aligned your PowerPoint presentation or whatever else we chat about, rather than that, more about, oh, how do you feel about that person? Is that something you're struggling with? So I think even though it's a work conversation, it's more about the emotion behind the work than the kind of activity of the work itself. But again, we've not really mentioned it, but boundaries are really important, particularly when we were doing some research around when you end up managing a friend, for example, you've got that kind of issue, like agreeing the boundaries between it, which is like when we spend time together outside of work, we won't talk about work, can also can be a healthy thing where there might be tension in a friendship too. Very conscious of your time, everybody, so we will leave you to your day. Next week's episode is about how to kind of manage difference at work. So when you've got different, sort of build actually from what we're talking about now, but when you're working with people who are different to you, sometimes that can feel difficult, but often there's a lot of advantages to it. So we're going to bring to life a model that we have in You Coach You, where people have different shapes for their profiles. So maybe you're a database diamond or a consensus seeking circle. We're going to bring all that to life, help you think about what you might be and how that might reflect in some of the relationships you work with, people that you work with, and how you can make that work for both of you, even when there's difference in the relationship. So that is next week. And then I don't know whether it's both of us, maybe it's both of us, maybe it's one of us, we will see, but hopefully see lots of you there, everybody. Oh, that's a good point, it's a bank holiday. No Pod Plus. I mean, maybe I'll still come on.
Next Thursday is a bank holiday.
Yeah, I think so. Isn't it like Jubilee stuff?
I don't know. I'm on holiday anyway because it's half term.
Oh, yeah, you're off. Yeah. No, everyone, no Pod Plus next week. Go enjoy your Jubilee bank holiday. I get to go to a party at the Palace. I'm so excited. I've got tickets to the Palace. Really excited. Sarah does not want to go to that. But anyway, okay, so that's not happening next week, but you can listen to the podcast and it'll be like, we're with you, with a good spirit. And we'll be back the week after.
Oh, have a good bank holiday, everybody.
Have a lovely bank holiday, everyone. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye everyone. Take care.